My name is Melanie. I am 33 years old and I woke up in a VIP hospital room after suddenly collapsing during a family dinner. Behind the half-open door, I heard my mother-in-law Beatrice whisper, "Are you sure she took it?" My sister-in-law Courtney let out a quiet laugh. "Relax. By tomorrow morning, everything will be ours." My blood ran cold, but I did not panic. I simply picked up my phone and texted my attorney. "Execute the plan. Now." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who completely underestimated your worth. The sterile smell of the hospital room filled my lungs as consciousness slowly returned to me. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed was the only sound in the dimly lit space. My eyelids felt incredibly heavy, as if they were made of solid lead, and a thick fog blanketed my brain. The last thing I remembered was sitting at the dining room table in my own house, raising a glass of expensive red wine to toast a supposedly peaceful family dinner. Then the room had started spinning. The edges of my vision had blurred into darkness, and my legs had given out entirely. Now waking up in this pristine suite at the local medical center, the puzzle pieces were rapidly snapping into place. My collapse was not from exhaustion, it was orchestrated. Through the narrow gap of the partially opened door, the hallway light spilled into my dark room, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. I kept my breathing shallow and even perfectly mimicking the rhythm of a deep sleep. That was when the voices drifted in. Beatrice spoke in a hushed, frantic tone that vibrated with malicious excitement. I heard her expensive heels pacing on the tile outside. Courtney replied with a dismissive scoff. She sounded completely unbothered by the fact that her brother's wife had just been rushed to the emergency room. Their conversation was sickeningly casual. They discussed my supply chain analytics firm as if it were a designer purse they had just stolen from a department store. I had built my company entirely from scratch. During my 20s, while Courtney was maxing out credit cards funded by her parents, and Beatrice was attending afternoon charity luncheons, I was working endless days. I had developed proprietary algorithms that revolutionized how major retail distributors tracked their global shipping logistics, saving corporations millions in lost revenue. I had sacrificed sleep, social outings, and personal comfort to turn a small startup into a highly profitable enterprise. I was self-made in every sense of the word. They, on the other hand, represented the worst kind of old money snobbery. They looked down on me because I actually worked for my wealth. To Beatrice, I was just a blue-collar girl who had somehow gotten lucky. She never respected my intellect or my drive. She only respected the bottom line of my bank accounts. Beatrice lowered her voice further, but in the quiet hospital corridor, I could hear every single word. She asked Courtney if she had put enough of the sedative in the wine to keep me out until the morning. Courtney confidently assured her mother that the dosage was perfect. They needed me incapacitated just long enough for Jason, my husband, to take control. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to trigger the alarm on the monitor. They had drugged me. My own in-laws had poisoned my drink in my own dining room just to stage a medical emergency. A normal person might have screamed for a nurse or burst into tears, but I was not a normal person. You do not build a corporate empire by reacting on pure emotion. You build it by observing, strategizing, and striking when your opponent is most vulnerable. I remained perfectly still, slowly sliding my hand under the thin hospital pillow. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of my smartphone. The paramedics must have brought my personal belongings in the overnight bag that now sat on the chair near the window. I carefully pulled the phone close to my chest, shielding the screen glow with my body. I opened my messages and found the contact for Harrison, my lead corporate attorney. Harrison was not just a lawyer. He was a strategic mastermind who specialized in protecting corporate assets from hostile takeovers and greedy relatives. I typed out 5 simple words: execute the plan right now. I hit send and watched the message deliver. For several months, I had sensed a dangerous shift in the family dynamics. Beatrice had been asking far too many probing questions about my corporate structure. and Courtney had been subtly trying to figure out where I kept my physical financial documents. Because I trusted my instincts, Harrison and I had already prepared for a hostile scenario. We had mapped out a contingency plan that would turn any attempt to steal my assets into a legal death trap. Less than a minute later, my screen lit up with a response from Harrison. Decoy documents accepted by the state. Talk screen confirms the sedative. Let them dig their graves. A fierce wave of satisfaction washed over me completely, cutting through the lingering grogginess of the drugs. Harrison was already 10 steps ahead of them. The decoy documents he mentioned were a masterpiece of legal misdirection. They looked completely legitimate, bearing all the proper corporate seals and financial jargon required to pass a superficial inspection. But in reality, they transferred control of a hollow shell company, not my primary holding trust. Furthermore, when I arrived at the emergency room, Harrison had used his medical power of attorney protocols to legally demand a comprehensive toxicology screen before Beatrice or Jason could restrict my visitors or tamper with my chart. The hospital had already found the heavy, non-prescribed sedative in my blood. The physical evidence of their crime was officially locked into my medical records, safely beyond their reach or manipulation. The toxicology screen was the ultimate insurance policy. Beatrice might think she was clever by using an untraceable street sedative, but modern medicine leaves no stone unturned when attorneys get involved. As I lay there waiting for the inevitable moment they would enter the room, my thoughts turned to Jason. My husband of 4 years, the man who had sworn to protect me and build a life with me. Where was he while his mother and sister casually confessed to drugging me? Did he know about the sedative? I remembered how he had poured the wine that night. He had been so attentive, making sure my glass was completely full, watching me take that first long sip with an intense look in his eyes that I had mistaken for affection. It was not affection. It was anticipation. Did he help crush the pills into my glass, or was he simply a willing pawn in Beatrice's grand scheme? The realization that my entire marriage might have been a long, calculated con game was devastating. It felt like a physical blow to my chest, knocking the remaining wind out of me. I thought back to how Jason had been acting lately, the subtle ways he had been trying to insert himself into my business meetings, the times he suggested I step back and let him handle the finances to reduce my stress. It all made sickening sense now. They had been grooming me for a takeover, testing my boundaries, looking for a moment of weakness. And when they could not find one naturally, they decided to artificially manufacture a medical crisis. The pain of that betrayal quickly transformed into a cold, hardened resolve. I had spent years trying to win the approval of a family that saw me only as a bank account to be drained. I had tolerated Beatrice's passive-aggressive insults and Courtney's blatant disrespect to keep the peace for Jason. I had compromised my own comfort to make them feel superior. No more. The whispering outside the door finally ceased. I heard the distinct sound of the heavy metal door handle turning. I quickly slipped my phone back under the pillow, closed my eyes, and let my breathing return to the slow, shallow rhythm of a heavily sedated patient. I relaxed my facial muscles, preparing to play the role of the weak, confused victim they desperately needed me to be. They wanted me to be helpless. They wanted me to be broken and submissive so they could swoop in and steal the empire I had built with my own hands. I was going to give them exactly the performance they paid for, right up until the moment I burned their entire world to the ground. The door creaked open, allowing a wider beam of bright hospital light to slice across my bed. I felt the presence of someone stepping into the room, their footsteps muffled against the floor. I kept my eyes shut tight, gathering every ounce of strength and cunning I possessed. The game had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea they were already losing. The familiar scent of bergamot and cedar filled the sterile air. It was the custom cologne I bought him for our anniversary, paid for by the very company he was currently trying to steal. I felt his hand wrap around mine. His fingers were cold. I let a soft, trembling breath escape my lips and slowly fluttered my eyes open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. Jason leaned over the bed. His face was a masterful mask of manufactured grief. He had practiced this look. The slightly furrowed brow, the downturned lips, the performative sigh of relief when he saw me awake. "Melanie, sweetheart," he murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "You gave us quite a scare. We thought we were going to lose you." I forced my voice to sound raspy and weak. "What happened? My head hurts." Jason sat on the edge of the mattress, shaking his head with a perfectly executed look of pity. He launched straight into his rehearsed narrative. "You broke down, Melanie. Your body simply gave out. The doctors said you overworked yourself into a complete physical and mental collapse." I stared at him, letting a look of manufactured confusion wash over my face. He squeezed my hand tighter, leaning in to deliver the psychological blow he had clearly been waiting years to land. "I warned you about this, darling." Jason continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have to understand, you did not grow up in this world. Your family, your background, it did not prepare you for the crushing weight of real corporate pressure. People with our kind of pedigree are raised to handle these high-stakes environments. We are conditioned for it from birth. But you pushed yourself far beyond what your mind could handle. You snapped Melanie. You had a complete psychiatric episode right there at the dinner table." The audacity of his lies burned in my chest. He was actively erasing my decade of relentless hard work, reducing my self-made success to a fluke that my supposedly inferior genetics could not sustain. He was weaponizing his old money arrogance to justify drugging his own wife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the intravenous line from my arm and slap that condescending look off his face. Instead, I let my lower lip tremble. I allowed a single highly convincing tear to roll down my cheek. I looked away, playing the part of the defeated, humiliated woman who finally realized she was out of her depth. "I am so sorry, Jason," I whispered, making my voice crack perfectly. "I thought I could handle it all." "Hush now," he said smoothly. "You do not have to worry about a thing anymore. I am going to take care of everything. In fact, we already took the first step." Jason reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. He pulled out a thick folded piece of legal paper and flattened it out on the hospital tray table. I recognized the heavy watermarked cardstock immediately. "What is that?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "It is the power of attorney," Jason explained, his voice taking on a soothing, almost hypnotic quality. "You were so frantic at dinner, Melanie. You were rambling about the stress and the numbers, and you begged me to help you. You signed this right before you collapsed. It gives me temporary control of your assets and the company. Just until you are better, of course. We are doing this to reduce your stress, honey, so you can focus entirely on getting your mind right." I looked down at the document. My signature was perfectly legible at the bottom of the page in bold blue ink. A cold realization washed over me. I knew exactly where that signature came from. Earlier that week, Beatrice had visited my home office under the guise of helping me organize some chaotic wedding anniversary files. She had handed me a massive stack of vendor agreements and catering contracts to sign. She had specifically slipped this legal document right into the middle of the pile, bearing the power of attorney beneath catering invoices. I had signed it blindly, trusting my mother-in-law. They had planned this corporate coup down to the very last detail. The sheer calculation of their betrayal was staggering. They had weaponized my trust, forged a narrative of mental instability, and poisoned my wine just to activate a stolen signature. Jason watched my face closely, waiting for a reaction. If I fought him, if I denied signing it, he would use it as further proof of my supposed mental break. He would call the doctors in and claim I was having delusions. He needed me to validate the lie. So I gave him exactly what he wanted. I let out a long, shuddering sob. I reached out and covered his hand with both of mine, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," I cried softly, letting my voice break with manufactured gratitude. "I do not know what I would do without you, Jason. I am just so tired. I cannot run the company anymore. Please just take it. Take care of it for me." A massive, triumphant smile spread across Jason's face. He could not completely hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. He had won. Or so he thought. He leaned down and pressed a lingering kiss to my forehead, the ultimate kiss of betrayal. "Rest now, my sweet girl," Jason whispered. "The adults will take it from here." He stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from his expensive suit, and tucked the fraudulent power of attorney safely back into his breast pocket. He walked toward the hospital room door with a noticeable bounce in his step. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the illusion of the helpless broken wife vanished from my face. I sat up perfectly straight in the hospital bed, my mind sharp and completely focused. I listened as Jason's footsteps faded down the hallway. I heard Beatrice's voice greet him in the distance, followed by a muffled celebratory laugh. They were leaving the hospital to revel in their victory. I threw off the thin hospital blanket and reached for the leather overnight bag sitting on the visitor chair. I unzipped the main compartment and ran my fingers along the seam until I found the hidden zipper I had custom sewn into the lining months ago. I reached inside the concealed pocket and pulled out a slim, encrypted tablet. This device was completely untraceable, disconnected from any network my husband or his family knew about. I typed in a complex passcode and opened a secure application. The screen went black for a fraction of a second before bringing up a grid of live camera feeds. Weeks ago, when I first noticed Beatrice asking suspicious questions about my corporate banking structures, I had hired a private security firm to install covert, high-definition cameras throughout our suburban Chicago home. I had hidden them in the crown molding inside the bookshelf speakers and behind the kitchen cabinetry. I tapped on the camera labeled Living Room and expanded the feed to fill the entire screen. The video buffered for a moment before snapping into crystal clear focus. I watched the front door of my house swing open. Jason strutted into the foyer looking like a conquering king returning from battle. Courtney, my sister-in-law, was already waiting for him in the living area. Courtney was holding a familiar green glass bottle. My blood boiled slightly. It was a rare vintage bottle of champagne I had purchased and saved specifically to celebrate my supply chain firm crossing its first $50 million valuation milestone. Courtney popped the cork, letting the expensive foam spill carelessly over the imported hardwood floors I had paid for. Jason laughed loudly, tossing his suit jacket onto my custom velvet sofa. He reached into his shirt and proudly slapped the fraudulent power of attorney down onto the marble coffee table. She bought every single word, Jason declared, his voice echoing clearly through the hidden microphone. She was practically begging me to take the company off her hands. The stupid girl thinks she had a nervous breakdown. Courtney poured the champagne into 2 crystal flutes, handing one to her brother. She leaned over the table, examining my stolen signature with a wicked grin. "I told you Mother's plan would work," Courtney sneered, taking a large gulp of my champagne. "It is honestly embarrassing how easy it was to break her. All it took was a few crushed pills and some big words, and she handed over the keys to the castle." Jason raised his glass high in the air, his face glowing with unearned arrogance and absolute greed. "To the Blackwell family portfolio," Jason announced loudly. "And to draining every last cent from my dear, sweet, incompetent wife." They clinked their glasses together, the crisp chime ringing through my speakers. I sat alone in the sterile hospital room, watching the 2 people I was supposed to call family celebrate the hostile theft of my life's work. They were toasting to my ruin, drinking my champagne in my house, completely oblivious to the fact that they were starring in a high-definition broadcast that would soon be their ultimate undoing. I did not cry. I did not throw the tablet or scream in frustration. I simply smiled, a cold, calculated smile that mirrored the ice running through my veins. The trap was perfectly set. Now it was time to let them walk right into the slaughter. 2 days later, the hospital officially discharged me. The crisp morning air of the Chicago suburbs slapped my face as Jason guided me toward his polished black SUV. He held my elbow with a tight, almost restrictive grip, playing the role of the devoted caretaker for the benefit of the passing nurses. I leaned heavily against him, dragging my feet slightly, offering the exact level of physical frailty he expected to see. Inside the vehicle, the silence was thick. Jason kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning for any sign of resistance or clarity. I gave him nothing but a vacant, exhausted stare. When we pulled into the circular driveway of our sprawling modern estate, I braced myself for the next phase of their operation. The heavy mahogany front doors swung open before Jason even put the car in park. Standing in the grand foyer, flanking the entrance like a pair of high society gargoyles, were Beatrice and Courtney. They had not just come to welcome me home. Two massive designer suitcases sat at the base of the grand staircase. They had moved in. "Oh, my poor fragile girl," Beatrice cooed as I stepped over the threshold. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders in a suffocating embrace. The overwhelming scent of her heavy floral perfume made my stomach churn. "We were so worried. But do not you fret for a single second. Courtney and I are going to take complete care of you. You will not have to lift a single finger." I forced a weak, grateful smile. "Thank you, Beatrice. I just feel so incredibly weak." Jason patted my back. "Mother is going to run the house while I handle the fires at your office, Melanie. You just need to focus on resting your mind. It has clearly been under too much strain." The psychological warfare began immediately. Beatrice essentially placed me under house arrest in my own living room. She confiscated my personal cell phone, claiming that any exposure to screens or business emails would trigger another psychiatric episode. I allowed her to lock the phone in the kitchen drawer, knowing my encrypted tablet was already safely hidden beneath the false bottom of my vanity drawer upstairs. By lunchtime, Beatrice had completely overhauled my kitchen. I had always maintained a strict clean diet to keep my energy up for long corporate hours, stocking the refrigerator with organic greens, lean proteins, and cold-pressed juices. I watched from the living room sofa as Beatrice systematically threw my expensive meal prep containers into the trash. In their place, she began cooking incredibly heavy, sluggish meals designed to make me feel physically weighed down. She brought me a massive plate of buttery, cream-soaked pasta and a thick cut of greasy meat. When I politely declined, citing a lack of appetite, her maternal facade dropped for a fraction of a second, revealing the dictator beneath. "You will eat every bite, Melanie," Beatrice commanded, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You are malnourished. Your brain is starving, which is exactly why you had that little mental break at dinner. You lack the natural constitution for corporate life. You need meat on your bones if you are ever going to recover." She sat next to me on the sofa, watching me force the heavy food down my throat. She reached over and patted my knee, her voice returning to that sickeningly sweet tone. "You really should consider making this retirement permanent, darling," Beatrice suggested softly. "The business world is simply too vicious for someone with your delicate background. You tried your best, and that is commendable for a girl from your neighborhood. But playing businesswoman has broken you. Let Jason handle the empire. He has the Blackwell blood. He was born to navigate these high stakes. You can just stay here, rest, and let the men do the heavy lifting." I swallowed a mouthful of the rich pasta, suppressing the urge to gag. "You might be right, Beatrice," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "I think I am just too tired to fight anymore." Her smile was radiant. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey finally stop struggling. For the next 2 days, I played the ultimate submissive victim. I slept for hours. I wore oversized sweatpants. I spoke in a quiet, defeated voice. I let them believe they had successfully crushed my spirit. But the moment the house grew quiet and Beatrice retreated to the guest wing for her afternoon nap, the real Melanie took control. I locked the door to the primary suite, retrieved my encrypted tablet from the vanity, and booted up the covert security system. I needed to know exactly what their endgame was. The cameras never lied. I tapped into the feed for my master closet. My closet was the size of a small boutique lined with custom glass display cases holding my collection of designer handbags, rare jewelry, and luxury watches. It was the physical manifestation of my hard-earned success. On the screen, I saw Courtney standing in the center of the room. She was not just looking, she was actively taking inventory. She had a leather-bound notebook open in one hand and a pen in the other. I watched as she casually unlatched the glass case containing my watch collection. She reached in and pulled out my rose gold Cartier timepiece, the one I had purchased to celebrate my first $1 million quarter. She unclasped her own cheap bracelet, slipped my Cartier onto her wrist, and admired it in the full-length mirror. She then moved to the jewelry display, pulling out a diamond tennis necklace and draping it over her collarbones. She was literally shopping in my closet. The bedroom door on the camera feed opened and Beatrice walked into the closet. She did not look shocked to see her daughter wearing my diamonds. Instead, she walked over and adjusted the necklace so it sat perfectly on Courtney's chest. "It looks much better on you anyway," Beatrice noted, her voice crisp and clear through the hidden audio feed. That girl never knew how to wear proper jewelry. She always looked like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. "When can I actually take it?" Courtney whined, admiring her reflection. "I want to wear the Cartier to the country club luncheon next week, but Jason said we have to leave her things in place for a few more days just to keep up appearances." "Patience, Courtney," Beatrice scolded lightly. "We have to do this strictly by the book. Jason is at her office right now, establishing dominance with her little staff. Once he has the corporate accounts fully locked down under the power of attorney, we move to phase 2. I leaned closer to the tablet, my heart pounding with cold anticipation. Phase 2 was the key. "We cannot just keep her locked in the house forever," Courtney complained, taking off the watch and carelessly tossing it back into the velvet-lined case. "She is going to snap out of this drug haze eventually, and she is going to realize Jason drained her accounts. What happens when she tries to call the police or her lawyer?" Beatrice let out a dark, hollow laugh. "She will not be calling anyone. The doctor I hired is finalizing the psychiatric evaluation paperwork as we speak. He is going to certify that her collapse was a severe psychotic break triggered by extreme stress and deep-rooted emotional instability. He will state she is a danger to herself and entirely unfit to manage her own affairs." Courtney's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "So we are actually going to commit her." By Friday, Beatrice confirmed, a cruel smile stretching across her face. "We are moving her to the long-term psychiatric care facility in the northern suburbs. The director there is an old friend of your father. He will ensure she is kept heavily medicated and completely isolated from the outside world. Once she is officially committed, Jason will be granted full permanent conservatorship over her entire estate. He will not just have power of attorney, he will own her." Beatrice reached out and tapped the diamond necklace still resting on Courtney's chest. "Once the judge signs that conservatorship order, everything in this house belongs to the Blackwell family. You can have the Rolex, the Cartier, the diamonds, all of it. We will simply report that the items were lost during her mental breakdown." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the frozen screen of my tablet. The sheer magnitude of their evil was breathtaking. They were not just trying to steal my company. They were trying to erase me from society. They wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward, drug me into submission, and strip my life down to the studs while wearing my jewelry to their country club luncheons. They thought my new money background meant I had no fangs. They thought because I did not come from generational wealth, I did not know how to play a ruthless game. They were tragically mistaken. I closed the security feed and opened a heavily encrypted communication portal. I did not feel fear. I did not feel sadness over the death of my marriage. All I felt was the icy, calculating thrill of the impending slaughter. Beatrice wanted a corporate war, and I was going to give her a massacre. I needed to move fast. Jason was currently sitting in my corporate headquarters, believing that the forged piece of paper in his pocket gave him the keys to the kingdom. He thought he was walking into a gold mine. I needed to make absolutely sure he was walking into an active minefield. The long-term care facility plan gave me a strict deadline. I had until Friday to completely dismantle their reality. I stood up from the bed, shedding the oversized sweatpants and the victim persona entirely. I walked into my master bathroom and splashed freezing cold water on my face, staring into my own eyes in the mirror. I was Melanie. I built a multi-million-dollar empire with my bare hands, navigating rooms full of ruthless executives who wanted to see me fail. I did not break then, and I certainly was not going to break now. I dried my face, returned to the bedroom, and pulled a secondary laptop from the air vent above the doorframe. I booted up the system and established a secure virtual private network connection to my company's central server. It was time to start the digital heist. If Jason wanted to play CEO, I was going to give him a company to run. It just was not going to be the company he expected. I cracked my knuckles and hovered my hands over the keyboard, ready to initiate the most devastating financial trap in Chicago history. The heavy oak door to the master suite swung open. I immediately scrambled backward against the headboard, pulling the thick duvet up to my chin. My fingers trembled on purpose. Jason strolled into the room, adjusting the cuffs of a bespoke navy suit. He looked remarkably energized for a man whose wife had supposedly suffered a severe psychiatric break just 2 days prior. "I am heading downtown to your office," he announced, admiring his reflection in the full-length mirror. "I need to handle a few minor operational things. The staff is probably running around like headless chickens without leadership. It is time someone stepped in to establish a proper corporate hierarchy." I let my breath hitch, forcing my eyes to widen in manufactured panic. "Jason, please," I whimpered, clutching the blankets tighter. "Do not change the core structure. David is the chief operating officer. He knows the daily operations inside and out. The client contracts are incredibly delicate right now. Just let David manage the floor while I recover." Jason turned away from the mirror and walked over to my side of the bed. He looked down at me with an expression of profound pity mixed with absolute arrogance. He reached out and patted my cheek as if I were a frightened toddler. "David is a worker bee," Melanie, Jason said smoothly. "He is a perfectly fine manager for a small-time operation, but he lacks the vision required to scale an enterprise of this magnitude. You built a nice little foundation, sweetheart. I will give you credit for that. But taking a company global requires a specific type of pedigree. It requires a firm, commanding hand. I am just going to streamline a few departments and review the capital allocation. Do not tax your fragile mind with it. You just focus on drinking your juices and getting your head straight." I squeezed my eyes shut, letting a single tear slip out. "Please, Jason, it is my life's work. It is our life's work now," he corrected, tapping the breast pocket where he kept the forged power of attorney. "I will be home for dinner. Be a good girl and rest." He turned on his heel and strode out of the room. I listened to his heavy footsteps echo down the grand staircase. I heard the faint murmur of Beatrice wishing him luck, followed by the heavy thud of the front door closing. The distant hum of his luxury SUV engine faded down the driveway. The second the property was silent, the terrified, trembling wife ceased to exist. I threw the duvet aside and vaulted out of bed. I locked the master bedroom door and engaged the deadbolt. I dragged the heavy velvet armchair in front of the door handle, just to be absolutely certain Beatrice could not barge in unannounced. I moved to the air vent above the door frame, retrieved my hidden encrypted laptop, and sat cross-legged in the center of the plush rug. I booted up the machine. The screen glowed with a harsh, bright light illuminating my focused expression. I launched a secure virtual private network, bouncing my connection through 3 different offshore servers to ensure my digital footprint was completely untraceable. I brought up the login portal for my company's central mainframe. I did not use my standard executive credentials. If Jason was already at the office or if he had instructed their IT team to monitor my accounts, a standard login would trigger an immediate security alert. Instead, I accessed a hidden developer backdoor I had coded into the system architecture 5 years ago during the company's infancy. It was an invisible gateway that completely bypassed the standard employee network I was in. The digital dashboard of my supply chain analytics firm materialized on the screen. This was the beating heart of my empire. It was not just a collection of spreadsheets and client contacts. It was a highly sophisticated living ecosystem of predictive algorithms. My software could anticipate global shipping bottlenecks, reroute cargo ships in real time based on weather patterns, and save multinational retail giants hundreds of millions of dollars in lost inventory. That proprietary code was the sole reason my company was valued in the 9 figures. It was time to gut the building. I opened the primary source code repository. I selected every single algorithmic sequence, every machine learning model, and every piece of predictive infrastructure. I initiated a secure transfer protocol. The destination was a blind holding trust located in the Cayman Islands, an impenetrable legal fortress that my attorney Harrison had finalized just 24 hours ago. I hit execute. A progress bar appeared on my screen. The transfer speed was agonizingly slow due to the massive volume of data and the heavy encryption layers protecting the pipeline. 10%, 20%. I glanced at the locked bedroom door, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic drumbeat against my ribs. If Beatrice demanded entry right now, the entire operation would be compromised. I held my breath, watching the green bar creep forward. 40%, 50%. While the proprietary code migrated, I opened a second terminal window. I needed to move the Tier 1 client data. These were the massive retail conglomerates, the multinational accounts that generated 90% of my firm's annual revenue. I isolated their active service contracts, their historical billing data, and their direct communication portals. I bundled the entire client database into a heavily encrypted archive. I linked the archive to the Cayman Trust transfer pipeline. 60%, 70%. I thought about Jason walking into my boardroom right now. He was likely wearing his most expensive suit, demanding coffee from my assistants, and looking down his nose at the brilliant engineers who had actually built the wealth he was attempting to steal. He believed that holding a piece of paper with a forged signature made him a titan of industry. He did not understand that a company is not a building or a bank account. A tech company is its data, and I was currently draining every single drop of blood from the corporate body. 80%, 90%. The screen flashed a bright solid green. Transfer complete. I let out a sharp, triumphant breath. The master server sitting in my downtown headquarters was now a hollow shell. The proprietary algorithms were gone. The Tier 1 client data was securely locked in an offshore trust that neither Jason nor Beatrice could ever touch. The company they thought they had stolen was now completely worthless, but I could not leave the system empty. If Jason logged into the executive dashboard and saw 0 active clients and missing source code, he would immediately panic. He would call his aggressive legal team before the end of the day, and they might find a way to freeze the offshore transfer before it fully settled. I needed Jason to remain arrogant. I needed him completely complacent and blindly confident until Friday night. I opened the system architecture configuration panel. I navigated to a deeply buried folder labeled Training Simulation. Years ago, when I was rapidly expanding my workforce, I had built a comprehensive sandbox environment. It was an exact pixel-perfect replica of the live corporate dashboard designed to train new executives without risking damage to the actual revenue streams. The sandbox populated the screens with simulated data running on a continuous loop of historical averages. I initiated a system-wide override. I redirected all executive-level access credentials directly into the sandbox environment. The trap was set. When Jason logged into the CEO portal from my corner office, he would not see an empty shell. He would see a thriving, bustling corporate empire. The simulated revenue charts on his monitor would tick upward in real time, projecting millions of dollars in fabricated daily profits. Phantom client emails generated by an automated script would populate his inbox, requesting standard updates and confirming receipt of services. The accounting portal would display a massive operating budget showing deep, overflowing cash reserves that simply did not exist in the real world. It was a digital terrarium designed specifically for his massive ego. Jason only cared about the appearance of power. He wanted to sit in a leather chair, stare at screens full of big numbers, and feel like a master of the universe. The sandbox would give him exactly that illusion. He would spend the entire week strutting around the office, barking orders based on fake analytics, completely unaware that he was playing an incredibly elaborate video game. I spent the next 10 minutes meticulously wiping my digital footprints from the server. I scrubbed the connection logs, deleted the access history from the developer backdoor, and severed the virtual private network. I left absolutely no trace that anyone had accessed the system from the outside. I shut down the laptop, feeling a profound sense of dangerous satisfaction. The corporate heist was flawlessly executed. They had tried to steal my life's work, but they had only managed to steal a mirage. The real treasure was locked away entirely under my control. I carefully slipped the laptop back into the air vent above the doorframe, securing the metal grate back into place. I pushed the heavy velvet armchair away from the door and unlocked the deadbolt. I stripped off my regular clothes, changed back into the oversized, unflattering sweatpants Beatrice had provided, and crawled back under the heavy duvet. I messed up my hair, rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated, and let my posture slump into a picture of absolute defeat. I lay there in the quiet bedroom, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my mother-in-law to check on her drugged, incompetent prisoner. I was ready for the next act of their pathetic theater. I was ready to let them dig their graves just a little bit deeper. The heavy wooden door clicked open, and the sharp rhythmic tapping of Beatrice's designer heels echoed across my bedroom floor. I kept my eyes closed for a fraction of a second longer before slowly blinking them open, putting on my best groggy expression. Beatrice stood at the foot of my bed, impeccably dressed in a tailored ivory suit, her hair perfectly coiffed into a rigid helmet of blonde waves. She held a pale, shapeless beige cashmere dress on a velvet hanger. "Get up, Melanie," Beatrice commanded, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "The caterers have finished setting up the terrace. Our guests are arriving in exactly 45 minutes. You need to be washed and dressed." I pushed myself up onto my elbows, letting my shoulders slump. "Guests?" I asked, making my voice sound raspy and weak. "Beatrice, I'm so tired. My head is spinning. Cannot I just stay in bed today?" "Absolutely not," she snapped, tossing the beige dress onto the foot of the bed. "You are going to make an appearance. We are hosting a recovery brunch in your honor. It is imperative that our social circle sees you looking fragile, but presentable. We need to control the narrative of your little breakdown before rumors start spreading at the country club. I will not have people whispering that my son married a complete lunatic. You will come downstairs, you will smile politely, and you will let Jason and me do all the talking. Do you understand?" I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes fixed on my hands. "Yes, Beatrice. Thank you for handling everything." She let out a short, dismissive huff and turned toward the door. "Put on the dress. And do not bother with too much makeup. You are supposed to look like you are recovering from a severe medical episode. A little pallor will sell the story much better." The moment she exited, a cold smirk touched my lips. She wanted a performance, and I was about to deliver an Oscar-winning routine. I moved to the master bathroom and splashed water on my face. I deliberately left my skin bare, adding only a touch of lip balm. I slipped into the shapeless beige dress, which successfully hid my athletic frame and made me look diminished, exactly as Beatrice intended. Then I walked over to my jewelry box. I bypassed the diamond studs and the gold bangles. Instead, I reached for a thick vintage silver pendant on a heavy chain. It was a beautiful piece, but its true value had nothing to do with the silver. 3 months ago, when I first noticed Beatrice snooping around my home office, I had instructed Harrison to procure a military-grade covert recording device. The tiny high-capacity microphone was seamlessly integrated into the back of the pendant. It could record up to 48 hours of crystal-clear audio, filtering out background noise to capture direct conversations perfectly. I clasped the heavy chain around my neck, feeling the cool silver settle against my collarbone. It felt like armor. I pressed the microscopic activation button hidden in the intricate filigree of the pendant. A tiny, invisible vibration confirmed the device was actively recording. I opened my bedroom door and began my slow descent down the grand staircase. The sprawling first floor of my home had been entirely transformed by Beatrice and Courtney. Dozens of floral arrangements cluttered the surfaces. The ambient chatter of 50 wealthy, influential Chicago elites floated through the air, mixed with the soft melodies of a hired string quartet playing on the back terrace. These were not my friends. These were investors, socialites, and board members of various local charities. They were the exact audience Beatrice needed to legitimize her hostile takeover. Jason waited at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a sharp charcoal gray suit and a meticulously crafted expression of sorrowful burden. He looked like the tragic hero of a high society drama. When he saw me, he rushed forward, wrapping a supportive arm around my waist, making sure everyone in the foyer saw his devotion. "Careful, darling," Jason murmured loud enough for a nearby group of investors to hear. "Let me support your weight." He leaned his mouth close to my ear, dropping his voice to a harsh, commanding whisper. "Do not say anything stupid, Melanie. Just nod, smile, and look grateful." I have powerful people here today, and I need them to know the company is in stable hands now. I leaned heavily against his side, letting my body sag against his arm. I will be good, Jason, I whispered back, ensuring my hidden microphone caught his threat and my submissive response. I am just so dizzy. Jason guided me through the crowd. Every interaction was a calculated microaggression. Guests approached us with sympathetic, pitying eyes. They spoke to me in slow, hushed tones as if I were a frightened child incapable of understanding complex sentences. Melanie, dear, you look so dreadfully pale, commented Patricia, a prominent real estate heiress and one of Beatrice's closest allies. She reached out and patted my arm condescendingly. You poor thing. The stress of trying to run a business simply destroyed your nerves, did not it? Thank goodness you have Jason to rescue you. I offered Patricia a weak, vacant smile. I am very lucky, I murmured, keeping my voice soft and breathless. Jason is my savior. I just could not handle the pressure anymore. My mind simply gave out. Patricia exchanged a knowing, superior look with Jason. It is nothing to be ashamed of, Melanie. Not everyone is built for the corporate battlefield. Some women are just meant to stay home and rest. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Courtney holding court near the mimosa bar. She was laughing loudly, tossing her hair back. As she reached for a champagne flute, the sleeve of her silk blouse slipped down, revealing my custom rose gold Cartier watch gleaming on her wrist. She caught me looking at it. Instead of hiding it, she deliberately raised her arm, taking a slow sip of her drink while holding my gaze, daring me to say something. She was testing my mental state, checking to see if I was lucid enough to recognize my own stolen property. I maintained my blank, sedated expression and looked away, pretending I had not noticed a thing. Courtney smirked and turned back to her friends, completely satisfied that I was heavily medicated and oblivious. Every piece of their arrogance was being permanently documented on the silver pendant resting against my chest. The brunch stretched on for an agonizing hour. I sat silently at a reserved table on the terrace, picking at a plate of heavy buttery pastries that Beatrice had explicitly instructed the caterers to place in front of me. Finally, the string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of conversation faded as Beatrice strode to the center of the terrace holding a crystal flute of my stolen champagne. She tapped a silver spoon against the glass, the sharp ringing cutting through the morning air. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice announced, her voice projecting with practiced theatricality, "if I could please have your attention." The guests gathered around the terrace, their eyes shifting between Beatrice and me. I slumped slightly in my chair, keeping my hands neatly folded in my lap. I angled my chest directly toward Beatrice, ensuring the microphone had a perfect line of sight to capture every single syllable of her impending confession. "I want to thank you all for gathering here today to support our family during this incredibly trying time." Beatrice began, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. As many of you know, earlier this week, we faced a terrifying crisis. Our dear Melanie suffered a catastrophic physical and psychiatric collapse. A collective murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Beatrice looked at me with an expression of performative sorrow. "We all want to believe we can do it all," Beatrice continued, her tone dripping with toxic condescension. "Melanie is an ambitious girl from a very modest background. She tried so incredibly hard to play in the big leagues. She tried to build a corporate entity that was simply far beyond her natural capabilities. And tragically, the immense pressure of that world fractured her mind. She broke under the weight of her own unnatural ambition." I kept my eyes downcast, playing the shamed, broken woman flawlessly. Inside, my heart beat with a steady, lethal rhythm. "Keep talking, Beatrice," I thought to myself. "Dig the hole deeper. Tell the world exactly what you have done." When we saw how deeply she was suffering, when we realized she had lost her grip on reality, we knew our family had to intervene, Beatrice declared proudly. We could not let her destroy herself or the business she worked so hard to start. Therefore, it is with a heavy heart, but a profound sense of duty, that I announce a major transition today. Because Melanie is completely unfit to lead, and because her mental state requires intensive long-term intervention, my son Jason has legally assumed total control of her supply chain analytics firm. The crowd broke into polite, supportive applause. Jason stepped forward, leaving my side to join his mother in the center of the terrace. He raised a hand, humbly soaking in the admiration of the high society elites. "Thank you, Mother," Jason said, his voice deep and authoritative. His arrogance was practically radiating off him. This was not the path we wanted, but it is the path necessity demands. Melanie signed a comprehensive power of attorney over to me moments before her mind completely shattered. She begged me to save her company. Starting Monday, I will be stepping in as the acting chief executive officer. I will be restructuring the executive board, reallocating the capital, and bringing this firm under the prestigious umbrella of the Blackwell family portfolio. I promise you all the chaos is over. Order has been restored. Jason raised his glass toward me. To Melanie, may she find the peace and quiet her fragile mind so desperately needs. To Melanie, the crowd echoed, raising their mimosas and champagne flutes in a mocking salute to my supposed downfall. I looked up at the sea of wealthy, privileged faces. I looked at Jason standing tall and victorious, believing he had just conquered my world. I looked at Beatrice, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of having finally crushed the daughter-in-law she despised. I looked at Courtney sipping my champagne while wearing my stolen Cartier watch. I slowly reached for the glass of sparkling water on the table in front of me. I let a gentle, vacant smile spread across my face. I raised my glass toward them, clinking it against the air in a gesture of absolute medicated gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered softly, ensuring my voice was captured perfectly by the silver pendant on my chest. "Thank you all for taking care of me." I took a slow sip of the cold water, hiding the dangerous, predatory gleam in my eyes behind the rim of the glass. The recording was flawless. I had them on tape explicitly admitting to a hostile corporate takeover based on fabricated claims of my mental incompetence. They had just publicly validated the forged power of attorney in front of 50 witnesses. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them in a court of law. The brunch resumed its lively chatter, the guests now completely satisfied that the natural order of things had been restored. Jason and Beatrice went back to mingling, working the crowd, securing future investments for the company they thought they owned. I sat quietly at my table, playing the perfect broken prop for their stage play. Let them enjoy the weekend. Let them drink the champagne and wear the stolen jewelry. Monday morning was coming, and when Jason walked into my boardroom, the explosive reality of my digital heist was going to tear his stolen kingdom straight down to the foundation. Monday morning arrived with the crisp, unforgiving chill typical of Chicago. From the secure vantage point of my heavily monitored master suite, I accessed the live feed from my corporate headquarters downtown. I had specifically designed my office security system to be impenetrable, but I had left a backdoor open just for this occasion. The high-definition cameras mounted discreetly in the lobby and boardroom gave me a front-row seat to the invasion. At precisely 9 a.m., the heavy glass doors of my supply chain analytics firm swung open. Jason marched in, flanked by Beatrice and a pair of sharp-suited lawyers who looked like they billed by the second. Jason wore a smug, entitled expression, holding his briefcase like a scepter. Beatrice trailed slightly behind him, her eyes scanning the modern industrial chic decor with a mixture of disdain and predatory calculation. They bypassed the reception desk, entirely ignoring the startled receptionist who tried to intercept them. Jason moved with the unearned confidence of a man who believed the world owed him deference simply because of his last name. He headed straight for the executive boardroom, the glass-walled nerve center of my operations. David, my chief operating officer and closest confidant in the company, was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table reviewing the morning analytics reports. He looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion as the invasion force poured into the room. "Can I help you, Jason?" David asked, keeping his tone professional but undeniably cold. "This is a restricted floor." Restricted. Jason did not answer immediately. He walked to the head of the table, slapped his briefcase down on the polished wood, and popped the latches. He reached inside and pulled out the forged power of attorney, slamming it down directly over David's reports. "I am not here for a visit, David," Jason declared, his voice ringing through the room. "As of this morning, I am the acting chief executive officer of this firm. Melanie has suffered a severe medical and psychiatric breakdown. She is completely unfit to manage her affairs. She signed this document granting me total operational and financial control. David picked up the document, his eyes scanning the heavy cardstock and my forged signature. I watched his face on the monitor. He was a brilliant operator, and I knew he was immediately looking for the catch. We had not discussed this specific scenario, but David knew me better than anyone. He knew I would never, under any circumstances, hand over my company to Jason. This signature looks authentic, David said slowly, maintaining his composure. But I need to verify this with our legal counsel before I hand over any operational authority. Beatrice stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. You will do no such thing, David, she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. The document is legally binding and notarized. You do not have the authority to question my son. This is a family matter that has tragically spilled over into the business. You will respect the transition of power, or you will find yourself unemployed before lunch. Jason leaned over the table, getting close to David's face. Let me make this very clear for you, he sneered. You work for me now. And frankly, I do not think your blue-collar management style is suitable for the direction I am taking this company. We need pedigree. We need real executive presence. I am demanding your immediate resignation. Pack your desk. David did not flinch. He looked at Jason, then at the two silent lawyers standing like bodyguards. You cannot just walk in here and fire the COO without board approval, Jason. Even with a power of attorney, there are corporate bylaws. Jason let out a harsh, barking laugh. He snapped his fingers at one of the lawyers, who immediately produced a thick stack of legal filings. I am not asking for your resignation, David. I am demanding it, Jason growled. And if you refuse, I will initiate an immediate audit of every single department you oversee. I will freeze your accounts. I will lock you out of the building, and I will tie you up in litigation for so long you will beg to resign. This company is a mess. It is chaotic, unstructured, new money garbage. I am here to clean it up. He turned away from David and began barking orders at the bewildered staff who had gathered outside the glass walls drawn by the commotion. You, Jason shouted, pointing at my lead data engineer. I want full administrative access to all server mainframes immediately. And you, he pointed to the head of accounting. I want every single corporate bank account frozen. No outbound transfers without my direct written authorization. I want a complete ledger of all liquid assets on this table in 10 minutes. Move. The staff exchanged panicked glances. They looked to David for guidance, but before David could speak, I decided it was time to make my entrance. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom slid open. The sudden silence that fell over the room was absolute. I walked in, my posture perfect, my expression completely serene. I wore a tailored black suit that screamed authority, a stark contrast to the oversized sweatpants I had been wearing just hours before. I did not look like a woman recovering from a mental breakdown. I looked like a CEO. The shock on Jason's face was instantaneous and profound. He stumbled backward, bumping into the table. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The two expensive lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Melanie. Jason stammered, his confident facade shattering. What are you doing here? You are supposed to be resting. You are sick. I ignored him entirely. I walked to the head of the table, stopped next to David, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. It is all right, David, I said, my voice calm and perfectly steady. You can pack your things. David looked at me, confusion warring with concern. Melanie, he said, what is going on? Are you okay? I am perfectly fine, David, I assured him, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Please just do as Jason asks. Pack your personal belongings and go home for the day. Beatrice recovered her voice, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my calm demeanor. You see, Jason, she is completely sedated. The poor girl does not even know where she is. She is just agreeing with whatever is happening. I turned my attention to Beatrice. I offered her a slow, deliberate smile that held absolutely no warmth. I know exactly where I am, Beatrice, I said smoothly. And I know exactly what is happening. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the master keycard for the executive suite. I held it out toward Jason. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "Take it, Jason," I instructed softly. "You wanted the company. You want to be the chief executive officer. It is yours. I am handing over the keys." Jason slowly reached out and took the keycard. His hand was shaking slightly. He looked down at the plastic rectangle, then back up at me. He was searching for the trap, but his massive ego would not let him see it. "You are giving up?" He asked, a triumphant smirk finally returning to his face. Just like that. "I am recognizing reality, Jason," I said, keeping my tone submissive and defeated. "You were right. The pressure was too much. I cannot handle it anymore. You have the pedigree. You have the Blackwell blood. You know how to run an empire, so run it." Beatrice clapped her hands together, a sharp, celebratory sound. "Finally, some sense from you. This is the best decision you have ever made, Melanie. We will make sure you are well taken care of while you recover. The adults will take it from here." I nodded meekly, turning away from them. I walked toward the boardroom doors. The staff parted to let me through, their faces etched with shock and betrayal. They thought I was abandoning them. They thought I was surrendering to a hostile takeover without a fight. As I reached the exit, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. Jason was already sitting in my chair, swiveling back and forth, grinning like a child who had just stolen a toy. Beatrice stood behind him, a dark, victorious queen. "Enjoy the view from the top, Jason," I said quietly. "It is a long way down." I walked out of the building, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I did not look back. I stepped into the bright, freezing Chicago morning and hailed a cab. As the car pulled away from the curb, I pulled out my phone and checked the hidden dashboard application. Jason was logging in. He was using the administrative credentials I had specifically left active. He was bypassing the security protocols just as he had demanded. The sandbox environment was fully operational. The screen on my phone displayed his activity. He was navigating straight to the financial portal exactly as I knew he would. He was bypassing the client algorithms, the predictive models, the actual core of the business. He only cared about the money. I watched as he clicked on the tab labeled Corporate Treasury. The simulated numbers popped up on the screen, projecting millions of dollars in fabricated liquid assets. The trap was sprung, and he was currently swimming in the digital illusion I had built for him. Now he was going to try and drain the vault. And he was going to discover that the vault was utterly, completely empty. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom slid open. The sudden silence that fell over the room was absolute. I walked in, my posture perfect, my expression completely serene. I wore a tailored black suit that screamed authority, a stark contrast to the oversized sweatpants I had been wearing just hours before. I did not look like a woman recovering from a mental breakdown. I looked like a CEO. The shock on Jason's face was instantaneous and profound. He stumbled backward, bumping into the table. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The two expensive lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Melanie, Jason stammered, his confident facade shattering. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be resting. You are sick." I ignored him entirely. I walked to the head of the table, stopped next to David, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is all right, David," I said, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "You can pack your things." David looked at me, confusion warring with concern. "Melanie," he said, "what is going on? Are you okay?" "I am perfectly fine, David," I assured him, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Please just do as Jason asks. Pack your personal belongings and go home for the day." Beatrice recovered her voice, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my calm demeanor. "You see, Jason? She is completely sedated. The poor girl does not even know where she is. She is just agreeing with whatever is happening." I turned my attention to Beatrice. I offered her a slow, deliberate smile that held absolutely no warmth. "I know exactly where I am, Beatrice," I said smoothly, "and I know exactly what is happening." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the master keycard for the executive suite. I held it out toward Jason. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "Take it, Jason," I instructed softly. "You wanted the company. You want to be the chief executive officer. It is yours." I am handing over the keys. Jason slowly reached out and took the keycard. His hand was shaking slightly. He looked down at the plastic rectangle, then back up at me. He was searching for the trap, but his massive ego would not let him see it. "You are giving up?" he asked, a triumphant smirk finally returning to his face. Just like that. "I am recognizing reality, Jason," I said, keeping my tone submissive and defeated. "You were right. The pressure was too much. I cannot handle it anymore. You have the pedigree. You have the Blackwell blood. You know how to run an empire. So run it." Beatrice clapped her hands together, a sharp, celebratory sound. "Finally, some sense from you. This is the best decision you have ever made, Melanie. We will make sure you are well taken care of while you recover. The adults will take it from here." I nodded meekly, turning away from them. I walked toward the boardroom doors. The staff parted to let me through, their faces etched with shock and betrayal. They thought I was abandoning them. They thought I was surrendering to a hostile takeover without a fight. As I reached the exit, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. Jason was already sitting in my chair, swiveling back and forth, grinning like a child who had just stolen a toy. Beatrice stood behind him, a dark, victorious queen. "Enjoy the view from the top, Jason," I said quietly. "It is a long way down." Jason leaned back in the custom ergonomic leather chair of the chief executive office, lacing his fingers together behind his head. The panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Chicago skyline, but Jason was entirely focused on the glowing computer monitor in front of him. He had spent the last 3 days strutting around the glass-walled corridors, firing junior executives who looked at him the wrong way and barking meaningless directives to a terrified staff. He was intoxicated by the illusion of absolute authority. Beatrice sat on the sleek modern sofa in the corner of the office, elegantly crossing her legs, while sipping a double espresso from a porcelain cup she had demanded an assistant fetch for her. The time for playing office politics was over. They had established dominance over the staff, and now it was time to secure the prize. Jason leaned forward, cracking his knuckles with a sharp, arrogant snap. He clicked open the financial portal on the executive dashboard. The simulated numbers I had coded into the sandbox environment shone brightly on the screen, projecting a massive, overflowing cash reserve. It was a digital mirage, but to Jason, it looked like a bottomless vault of liquid wealth just waiting to be drained. "Let us move the first installment, Mother," Jason said, a greedy smile stretching across his face. $2 million should be enough to cover your new offshore accounts and give us plenty of walking around money while the lawyers dismantle the rest of her pathetic little empire. Beatrice hummed in agreement, setting her espresso cup down on a glass table. "Make sure you route it through the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands. We need the funds completely washed and untraceable before Melanie wakes up from her medication haze and realizes she is entirely broke." Jason nodded eagerly. He pulled the forged power of attorney from his briefcase, using the legal identification numbers to access the primary wire transfer protocol. He typed in the destination routing numbers, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. He entered the amount: $2 million. He clicked the bright blue authorization button, fully expecting the screen to flash a confirmation message. Instead, the system froze. A harsh, violent red banner slammed across the monitor. The digital alarm seemed to echo in the quiet office. "Transaction denied. Insufficient funds." Jason frowned, leaning closer to the screen. His arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He clicked the authorization button again, pressing the mouse with a little more force. The same aggressive red banner flashed back at him. "Transaction denied. Insufficient funds." "That is impossible," Jason muttered, his voice tightening with a sudden spike of anxiety. "The dashboard clearly shows over $40 million in operating capital. There must be a glitch in the security firewall." Beatrice stood up, her perfectly manicured brow furrowing as she walked over to stand behind his chair. "Do not just sit there clicking like a fool, Jason. Call the bank. You have the power of attorney. Force the transfer through manually. We cannot afford any delays with this kind of capital." Jason grabbed the sleek office phone and dialed the direct line for the corporate banking manager. He did not bother with pleasantries. The moment the manager answered, Jason launched into a tirade. He barked his name, cited his new legal authority as acting chief executive officer, and demanded to know why his wire transfer to the Cayman Islands was being blocked by an incompetent automated system. I listened to the entire exchange through the covert audio feed I had installed in the office ceiling. The bank manager remained perfectly professional, asking Jason to verify the specific account numbers listed on his power of attorney document. Jason rattled off the numbers with arrogant impatience, tapping his expensive leather shoes against the floor. There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. The bank manager cleared his throat, his voice perfectly polite but utterly devastating. "Mr. Blackwell, I am looking at the account associated with that specific limited liability company. There is no security block on the transfer. The transaction was denied because you are attempting to wire $2 million from an account that currently holds a balance of exactly $400. Jason froze. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in an expensive suit. He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What did you just say to me?" Jason demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, trembling whisper. "That is a lie. I am looking at the executive dashboard right now. It shows tens of millions in liquid capital. You are looking at the wrong account. I assure you, sir, I am looking at the exact account listed on your legal documentation," the bank manager replied calmly. "The entity you have power of attorney over is a secondary liabilities holding shell. It has never held more than a few $100s to keep the account active. If you are looking at a dashboard showing millions, I suggest you contact your internal technology department because those funds do not exist in our institution." The phone slipped from Jason's hand, clattering noisily against the mahogany desk. He stared blankly at the screen, the red denial banner mocking him. The grand illusion of his corporate conquest was shattering into a million sharp, jagged pieces. He was not the king of a tech empire. He was the legally appointed captain of an empty, sinking ghost ship. "What is it?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "Jason, what did the bank say? Where is the money?" "It is gone." Jason choked out, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. "There is nothing in the account. $400, that is all there is. She left us $400. Beatrice let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her pristine, high society facade cracked instantly, revealing the desperate, greedy predator beneath. "We need to go back to the house," Beatrice ordered, her voice trembling with absolute fury. "We need to go right now." I was standing in the grand upstairs hallway of our suburban home when I heard the heavy front doors crash open. Jason and Beatrice stormed into the foyer, bringing a wave of frantic, chaotic energy with them. Jason was sweating profusely, his tie loosened, his suit jacket flapping wildly behind him. He clutched the forged power of attorney in one hand and a stack of printed bank statements in the other. "Melanie." Jason roared, his voice echoing up the massive curved staircase. "Where are you?" I calmly walked to the top of the landing, looking down at them. I was dressed in a comfortable cashmere sweater and leggings, holding a mug of herbal tea. I made sure my posture was relaxed, my expression a perfect mask of wide-eyed, innocent confusion. "Jason." I called down softly, keeping my voice gentle and slightly fragile. "What is wrong? You are shouting. You promised you would not stress me out today." Jason charged up the stairs, taking them two at a time until he stood just inches away from me in the hallway. He shoved the crumpled bank statements directly into my face, his chest heaving with exertion and raw panic. "Where is the money, Melanie?" he screamed, completely abandoning his devoted husband act. "I went to wire the funds. I logged into the bank with the power of attorney you signed. The account is empty. There is only $400. Where did you hide the corporate capital?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I tilted my head to the side, blinking at him with large, uncomprehending eyes. I let a moment of dead silence stretch between us, allowing his panic to marinate before I delivered the lethal blow. "Oh, the operating capital," I said, my voice light, breezy, and entirely innocent. "That is in the primary holding trust. I moved it to the Cayman Islands days ago for security purposes. The power of attorney you had me sign at dinner only covers the secondary liabilities shell. I thought you knew that, Jason. You are the one with the business pedigree. Jason staggered backward as if I had physically struck him in the chest. He looked down at the forged document in his hand, the realization finally crashing down on him. The paper he had risked federal prison to forge was completely worthless. He had stolen the legal rights to an empty bucket. Beatrice reached the top of the stairs, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and rising terror. She saw the cold, calculated intelligence hiding just behind my innocent smile. She finally realized that the helpless, sedated daughter-in-law she thought she was manipulating was actually a predator who had just lured them into a trap. "You planned this," Beatrice hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You knew exactly what we were doing. You set us up." I took another calm sip of my tea. "I do not know what you mean, Beatrice. I am just a simple, overworked girl who had a mental breakdown. You are the ones taking care of my business affairs. I am just focusing on my recovery." Beatrice stepped forward, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "You think you are so clever, Melanie. You think you can outsmart us. But you are forgetting one very important detail." I raised a single eyebrow, inviting her to continue. "You are heavily medicated," Beatrice snarled, her aristocratic composure completely destroyed. "You have a documented history of psychiatric instability. If you think you can hide that money from us, you are dead wrong. We will go to the courts tomorrow morning. We will have you declared legally incompetent. We will put you in a conservatorship so tight you will not be able to breathe without my permission. I will personally see to it that you are locked in a psychiatric facility for the rest of your miserable life." I looked at Beatrice, my expression completely unchanging. I did not flinch at her threats. I did not cower. I just offered her a slow, chilling smile. "Good luck with that, Beatrice," I whispered softly. "I hear the courts are very particular about their paperwork." I turned my back on them and walked calmly down the hallway toward the master suite, taking my tea with me. I left them standing there in the corridor, suffocating in their own panic. They thought they still had a trump card to play. They thought a corrupt doctor and a conservatorship threat would force me into submission. They had absolutely no idea that by escalating this to the legal system, they were stepping onto a battlefield where I held every single weapon. The war was entering its final phase, and I was going to enjoy every second of their destruction. The silence that fell over the grand estate after our confrontation in the hallway was not a peaceful one. It was the suffocating, heavy quiet of a war room just before the final assault is launched. I had humiliated Jason and Beatrice, exposing their grand corporate heist as nothing more than a desperate grasp at an empty vault. I had legally outmaneuvered them, moving my life's work into an impenetrable offshore trust. But I knew people like my mother-in-law did not simply accept defeat. When old money predators are backed into a corner, they do not surrender. They escalate. For 2 agonizing days, I remained secluded in the master suite. The psychological warfare was intense. Beatrice and Jason treated me not as a family member, but as a hostile captive. They stopped speaking to me directly. Whenever they passed my bedroom door, their conversations dropped to venomous, calculated whispers. They were starving me of information, hoping the isolation would crack my nerves. I played my part flawlessly. I stayed in my oversized sweatpants, barely touching the heavy, greasy meals Beatrice sent up on a silver tray. I sat by the window, staring blankly at the frost-covered Chicago landscape, presenting the exact image of a woman whose spirit had been entirely broken. The retaliatory strike arrived on a Thursday morning, carried by a bonded legal courier. I heard the heavy chime of the front doorbell echo through the foyer, followed by the low murmur of Jason signing for a package. A few moments later, purposeful, aggressive footsteps pounded up the grand staircase. The master bedroom door swung open without a knock. Jason marched into the room. The panicked, desperate man who had screamed at me about empty bank accounts was gone. In his place stood the arrogant, entitled heir I had unfortunately married. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, his posture radiating a sickeningly renewed confidence. He held a thick, heavy manila envelope in his right hand. He did not look at me with anger. He looked at me with the cold, detached pity one might reserve for a wounded animal that needed to be put down. "It is over, Melanie," Jason announced, his voice smooth and lethally calm. "You thought you were incredibly clever hiding the corporate capital. You thought you could outplay my mother in a game our family invented. But you forgot a very basic rule. You do not bring a calculator to a knife fight." He stepped forward and tossed the thick manila envelope onto the duvet over my lap. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Open it," he commanded. I let my hands tremble slightly as I reached for the flap. I pulled out a towering stack of legal documents, the pages stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Circuit Court. The bold black lettering at the top of the first page made my blood run instantly cold, despite my extensive preparation. It was an emergency injunction for a temporary conservatorship. Beatrice had not just threatened me in the hallway. She had mobilized her entire fleet of high-powered attorneys to execute a full-scale legal assassination. The petition was a masterclass in weaponized litigation. It claimed in stark legal terminology that I was in immediate danger to myself and my assets. It cited my recent catastrophic mental collapse at the dinner table as the inciting incident. But the true evil lay in how they framed my defensive strategy. The petition explicitly stated that my sudden, unprompted transfer of tens of millions of dollars to a blind offshore trust was not a business maneuver, but a severe symptom of paranoid delusions and financial irrationality. They were using my brilliant countermove as the absolute proof of my insanity. I scanned the pages, feeling a genuine wave of nausea at the sheer audacity of their lies. The conservatorship would strip me of every single basic human right. If the judge granted this injunction, Jason would be appointed as my absolute legal guardian. I would no longer be a person in the eyes of the law. I would be property. Jason would gain total, unquestionable control over my finances, my company, my offshore trust, and most terrifyingly, my medical care. He could legally force the repatriation of my hidden funds and dissolve my life's work with a single signature. But a judge would never grant such sweeping draconian power based solely on the testimony of a greedy mother-in-law and a resentful husband. They needed undeniable proof. They needed science. I turned to the final section of the packet labeled Medical Affidavit. This was the cornerstone of their entire attack. Attached was a sworn notarized statement from a Dr. Elias Vance, a private physician with luxury offices on the Gold Coast. I knew exactly what Dr. Vance was. In the elite circles of Chicago high society, he was an open secret. He was a concierge doctor for the ultra-wealthy, a man who catered to billionaires and political dynasties. He was famous for fixing inconvenient family problems. For the right price, Dr. Vance would write any prescription sign, any medical excuse, or in my case, fabricate an entirely fictional psychiatric diagnosis. Dr. Vance's affidavit was a terrifying piece of medical fiction. He claimed to have thoroughly evaluated my historical medical records and conducted a comprehensive psychiatric assessment. He diagnosed me with acute stress-induced psychosis, characterized by extreme paranoia, delusions of persecution, and highly erratic self-destructive behavior. He explicitly stated under penalty of perjury that my sudden physical collapse at the dinner table was not a medical emergency, but the physical manifestation of a total mental breakdown. He completely ignored the reality of my healthy lifestyle and the total lack of any prior psychiatric history. The final paragraph of the affidavit was a death sentence. Dr. Vance concluded that my condition was rapidly deteriorating. He strongly recommended immediate, permanent, and heavily supervised institutionalization for my own safety and the preservation of my estate. Beatrice had bought a doctor. She had paid a premium to weaponize a medical license against her own daughter-in-law. They had created a flawless, closed loop of lies. My collapse was the symptom, the asset transfer was the proof of my paranoia, and Dr. Vance provided the ultimate unquestionable medical stamp of approval. Jason watched my eyes dart across the pages. He soaked in my silence, mistaking my intense focus for absolute despair. "The emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Jason stated, crossing his arms over his chest. "The judge is going to review these documents. My mother and I will testify to your increasingly unhinged behavior, and the court will grant the conservatorship before lunchtime." He leaned down, placing both hands on the mattress, trapping me in his shadow. "You have two choices, Melanie. You can come to the courthouse quietly tomorrow. You can stand before the judge, accept that your mind is broken, and let me take over. Or you can fight. You can scream and cry and claim we are plotting against you. And when you do, you will perfectly validate every single word in Dr. Vance's psychiatric report. If you resist, I will have the court order a medical transport to drag you out of this house in restraints. Either way, your run is over. You are done." The trap was terrifyingly brilliant. If I fought back, I looked crazy. If I surrendered, I lost my life. It was a perfect, inescapable corner. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They believed their wealth and social standing insulated them from the consequences of their lies. They believed that old money could simply buy a new reality. They had absolutely no idea that I held the only piece of physical evidence capable of destroying their entire fabricated universe. I looked up at Jason. I let my lower lip quiver. I forced a look of complete shattered defeat into my eyes. I let two fat tears spill over my eyelashes and roll down my cheeks. "I am just so scared, Jason," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "I do not want to be locked away in a hospital. Please. I just wanted to build something important. I did not mean to go crazy." Jason smiled. It was a sickening, victorious expression. He reached out and stroked my hair, playing the role of the benevolent captor. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured softly. "But the adult world was just too much for you. Do not worry. I will make sure they put you in a very nice, very quiet facility. You will be taken care of. Just get dressed tomorrow morning and do not make a scene." He turned and walked out of the bedroom, locking the door firmly behind him. The heavy click of the deadbolt echoed through the room. The moment the lock engaged, the fragile weeping wife vanished. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. The cold, calculating fury that drove my entire empire roared back to life. I threw the legal documents onto the floor. I moved swiftly to the air vent above the doorframe, reaching inside to retrieve my encrypted tablet. The situation had officially escalated to a battle for my freedom, and Harrison needed to know the enemy had launched their heaviest artillery. I opened the secure messaging portal and typed rapidly. "Vance affidavit filed. They are moving for the emergency conservatorship tomorrow morning. They are trying to lock me in a psychiatric facility." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a steady, lethal rhythm against my ribs. 10 seconds later, the encrypted reply from my attorney appeared. "Let them present their entire case. Let them swear to every single lie under oath. We do not stop the hearing. We strike at the deposition. Do not break character. We are going to let them dig a hole so deep they will never see sunlight again." I locked the tablet and hid it away. I looked at the closed bedroom door, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Beatrice and Jason thought they had bought the perfect lie. They thought a corrupt doctor was their golden ticket to my fortune. They were completely unaware that tomorrow morning they were going to walk into a legal slaughterhouse, and I was going to gladly hold the door open for them. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick, overcast Chicago sky as Jason escorted me out of the house. He gripped my upper arm with a bruising force, practically dragging me toward the waiting luxury sedan. Beatrice was already seated in the back, wearing a somber charcoal suit that screamed conservative mourning. She did not even look at me when I slid into the leather seat beside her. She simply stared straight ahead, her jaw locked in a tight, victorious line. The drive downtown was entirely silent. They were treating me like a prisoner being transported to the executioner's block. I played my part to perfection. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders slumped, and my eyes fixed blankly on my own hands resting in my lap. I was the very picture of a broken, sedated woman who had completely surrendered to her fate. We arrived at the towering glass and steel structure of the downtown legal district. Jason practically pulled me from the vehicle, eager to get me inside before my supposed fragile mind could cause a public scene. We navigated through the metal detectors and the bustling marble corridors. We were not heading into an open courtroom. Because this was an emergency injunction hearing involving high net worth individuals and sensitive medical claims, the initial proceedings were being handled in a private windowless deposition room. It was a sterile, claustrophobic space designed to strip away comfort and force the unvarnished truth to the surface. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive nervous sweat. My attorney Harrison was already seated at the long mahogany conference table. He looked up as we entered. His face was a masterful blank slate. He did not rush to comfort me or offer any signs of aggressive legal strategy. He simply gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. I took the heavy leather chair beside him. Jason and Beatrice took their seats on the opposite side of the table, flanked by their lead attorney, a bulldog of a man named Sterling, and a nervous-looking junior associate who was busy organizing towering stacks of fabricated evidence. The court reporter, a quiet woman with a stenography machine, sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over the keys. The atmosphere in the room crackled with intense, barely contained hostility. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie, and initiated the formal proceedings. He laid out their objective with ruthless efficiency, officially entering Dr. Vance's fraudulent medical affidavit into the record. He painted a tragic, condescending picture of a highly ambitious but fundamentally unstable woman who had simply collapsed under the crushing weight of her own unnatural corporate aspirations. Beatrice was called as the first witness. The court reporter administered the oath. Beatrice placed her perfectly manicured hand on the Bible, swore to tell the whole truth, and immediately launched into a spectacular symphony of calculated perjury. She leaned toward the microphone resting in the center of the table. Her voice dropped to a theatrical, hushed whisper, perfectly conveying the sorrow of a mother-in-law watching a tragedy unfold. "It completely breaks my heart to have to say these things on the record," Beatrice testified, dabbing at her completely dry eyes with a monogrammed lace handkerchief. "I have always considered Melanie to be the daughter I never had. We welcomed her into our family with open arms despite her lack of proper upbringing. But she has been profoundly unwell for months." Sterling guided her through the narrative with practiced precision, serving up leading questions that allowed Beatrice to construct her cage of lies. "Can you describe Melanie's behavior in the weeks leading up to her hospitalization?" Mrs. Blackwell Sterling asked, his tone dripping with manufactured sympathy. Beatrice let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. "She started showing signs of extreme, unrelenting paranoia," Beatrice stated firmly. "She stopped sleeping entirely. She would pace around her home office for days on end, rambling incoherently about numbers and algorithms that simply did not exist. She became convinced that her own loyal employees were plotting against her, stealing from her. It was absolutely terrifying to witness. We tried to suggest she seek professional psychiatric help, but she became violently hostile at the mere suggestion." I sat perfectly still beside Harrison, my hands neatly folded in my lap. I did not object. I did not shake my head or show a single flash of anger. I maintained my vacant, medicated stare, secretly absorbing every single perjured word she spoke. She was checking every legal box required to declare a person mentally incompetent. Paranoia, hostility, erratic behavior, severe sleep deprivation. She was expertly building my legal coffin. And on the night of the 14th, the night of her physical collapse, what was her demeanor like before dinner? Sterling prompted, leaning forward to ensure the court reporter captured every detail. She was completely disconnected from reality. Beatrice testified, her voice taking on an edge of manufactured fear. She was aggressive and entirely unpredictable. She looked right at me and told me she was going to burn her entire company to the ground rather than let anyone else succeed. I genuinely feared for my son's physical safety. When she finally collapsed at the dining table, it was almost a relief. We realized her mind had simply snapped, and we finally had the opportunity to step in and save her from destroying herself. She looked across the table at me, her eyes filled with toxic, victorious malice. She believed she had won. She believed her social standing and her hired doctor made her completely immune to the consequences of perjury. Harrison sat silently beside me, his expensive pen moving rhythmically across his yellow legal pad. He did not object to a single statement. He just let her talk, allowing her to dig the hole deeper and deeper with every fabricated detail. When Sterling finally concluded his questioning, Beatrice leaned back in her chair, looking incredibly satisfied with her performance. The court reporter typed furiously, securing the lies into the permanent legal record. Next, it was Jason's turn. He took the oath with a solemn, heavy expression. He played the role of the devastated, fiercely loyal husband flawlessly. His performance was so incredibly convincing that it might have swayed a less astute observer. He looked at me across the mahogany table, his eyes shining with manufactured pity, and I felt a wave of profound disgust wash through my veins. Mr. Blackwell Sterling began adjusting his glasses. Can you describe your wife's mental state and her financial decisions in the days leading up to this emergency injunction? Jason let his shoulders drop, presenting the image of a man carrying the weight of the world. It has been an absolute nightmare, Jason said, letting his voice crack with perfectly timed emotion. Melanie is a brilliant woman. Nobody is denying what she managed to build. But the pressure of running that firm broke her completely. She stopped making sense. She started hoarding documents and hiding her computer. And then, without any logical business reason, she started transferring massive corporate assets. Sterling nodded encouragingly. Can you elaborate on these asset transfers for the record, Mr. Blackwell? She transferred tens of millions of dollars in proprietary source code and client data to a blind offshore account. Jason testified, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. She did not consult me. She did not consult her board of directors. She did not consult her chief operating officer. It was a severe manic episode. She was convinced the government was trying to seize her technology. I love my wife more than anything in this world, and I am only trying to protect her legacy. This conservatorship is the only way to ensure she does not completely destroy everything she has spent her entire life building. I need the legal authority to repatriate those stolen funds and secure her company before she causes irreparable harm to herself and her investors. He looked down at his hands, folding them tightly together. He was the perfect reluctant savior. I sat silently, my expression entirely unchanging. I watched the man I had married perjure himself without a single ounce of hesitation. He was not just trying to steal my company. He was trying to legally erase my autonomy. He was begging a judge to turn me into a helpless ward of the state, a prisoner in my own life, just so he could access the offshore accounts he knew he could not touch without my authorization. The deposition dragged on for nearly 3 grueling hours. Beatrice and Jason built their case meticulously. They relied on their generational wealth, their polished appearances, and Dr. Vance's fraudulent medical affidavit to lend absolute credence to their malicious lies. They painted me as a brilliant but dangerously fragile lunatic who needed to be locked away for her own good. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they didn't notice the subtle shift in the room's energy. They didn't notice that Harrison had stopped writing on his legal pad. Mr. Harrison Sterling finally asked, a triumphant, condescending smirk playing on his lips as he gathered his neat stacks of paper. My clients have provided comprehensive testimony regarding the necessity of this emergency conservatorship. Do you have any questions for the witness before we conclude this session and present the transcripts to the judge for his ruling? Harrison stood up slowly. He took his time, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with deliberate, agonizing precision. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying professional detachment. He did not look like a man whose client was about to be committed to a psychiatric facility. He looked like an executioner who had just been handed the axe. I have just one question for Mr. Blackwell, Harrison said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the stale air of the deposition room with lethal authority. Jason looked up, his expression guarded but still brimming with arrogant confidence. He shifted in his heavy leather chair, ready to deflect whatever minor legal technicality my lawyer was about to throw at him. Go ahead, Jason commanded. Ask your question. We are ready to wrap this up. Harrison leaned forward, resting both of his hands flat on the polished mahogany table. He locked eyes with my husband, his gaze completely unwavering and devoid of any mercy. The trap was fully loaded, the safety was off, and Jason was standing directly on the pressure plate. The entire room held its breath, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was about to give way. Mr. Blackwell, under penalty of perjury, did you or anyone acting on your behalf crush a heavy, non-prescribed sedative into your wife's wine on the evening of the 14th? The question hit the sterile deposition room with the concussive force of a physical explosion. The silence that instantly followed was absolute, thick, and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I watched the air completely leave Jason's lungs. His chest stopped moving. His eyes, previously locked on Harrison with arrogant defiance, widened by a fraction of an inch as the color drained entirely from his face. Beside him, Beatrice stiffened so violently that her spine snapped rigidly against the back of her leather chair. Jason tried to recover. He relied on the only defense mechanism he had ever known, his generational entitlement. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly above his silk tie, and forced a scoff. "That is an absolutely absurd and offensive question," Jason snapped, though his voice lacked its usual booming resonance. It sounded thin, reedy, and laced with a sudden, undeniable undercurrent of panic. "Absolutely not. My wife suffered a severe spontaneous psychiatric episode. That is a documented medical fact confirmed by a licensed physician. So you deny introducing any foreign intoxicating substance into her beverage?" Harrison pressed, his voice dropping to a deadly, uncompromising calm. "You state for the official legal record that you did not drug your wife." "I deny it completely," Jason stated firmly, sealing his fate with one final arrogant lie. Harrison did not blink. He did not smile or show a single ounce of triumph. He simply maintained his cold, predatory stare, slowly reaching down into his slim leather briefcase. He withdrew a crisp white, heavy stock envelope bearing the unmistakable embossed seal of Chicago Memorial Hospital. He broke the seal with a sharp, decisive snap that caused Beatrice to physically flinch. He extracted a multi-page document, unfolding it smoothly onto the polished mahogany table. "This," Harrison announced, his voice carrying a resonant, lethal authority, "is the certified toxicology report from the emergency medicine department at Chicago Memorial. It was ordered and executed immediately upon my client's admission on the night of the 14th. Sterling, Jason's bulldog attorney, leaned forward, his brow furrowing in sudden, intense concern. He recognized the shift in the room's gravity. He recognized that opposing counsel was not bluffing. "The comprehensive screening," Harrison read aloud, his eyes tracking the text with surgical precision, "confirms the presence of a heavy, non-prescribed synthetic sedative in Mrs. Blackwell's bloodstream. Specifically, it identifies a massive dose of a fast-acting benzodiazepine consistent with the pharmacological profile of a profound, rapid-onset chemical tranquilizer." Harrison looked up from the paper, locking his gaze directly onto Jason's pale, sweating face. "Furthermore, the attending toxicologist confirms the absolute absence of any underlying physiological condition, chemical imbalance, or organic substance consistent with a spontaneous psychiatric event. She did not have a mental breakdown, Mr. Blackwell. She was poisoned. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating." Jason stared at the medical document as if it were a live grenade placed directly in his lap. The arrogant sneer vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked at his mother silently, begging her to fix it, to use her wealth and influence to make the damning paper disappear. But Beatrice was paralyzed. Her hand flew to her mouth, her manicured nails digging painfully deep into her own cheek. Her eyes were wide with pure horror as her meticulously constructed high society illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces. In the back row of the deposition room, the hired medical mercenary Dr. Elias Vance suddenly shot up from his chair. The sudden movement drew every eye in the room. His face was slick with a heavy, nervous sweat. He looked at the toxicology report in Harrison's hand, then looked at the court reporter who was furiously typing every single word into the permanent legal record. Dr. Vance realized in a fraction of a second that his lucrative career catering to the corrupt elite was over. He realized he had just committed extreme medical malpractice and submitted a fraudulent perjured affidavit to a federal judge. "I need to consult with my counsel." Dr. Vance stammered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. He did not wait for permission or acknowledgement from the judge's clerk. He grabbed his briefcase, practically sprinting for the heavy wooden door, desperate to distance himself from the impending criminal wreckage. The slam of the door behind him echoed like a final verdict. Sterling scrambled to pull the toxicology report across the table, his confident, aggressive demeanor evaporating instantly. As his eyes rapidly scanned the official medical seals and the undeniable chemical data, his face turned the color of ash. He looked at Jason with an expression of profound, unfiltered disgust. Sterling was a ruthless corporate lawyer, but he was not a fool. He realized with horrifying clarity that his wealthy clients had just used his law firm to file fraudulent documents, and that they had just committed blatant, easily provable perjury right in front of him. Harrison did not give them a single moment to breathe. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver USB drive, placing it deliberately next to the toxicology report. Furthermore, Harrison stated, cutting through the panicked murmuring of the opposing counsel, "We have legally secured and authenticated the complete, unedited security footage from my client's private residence. The audiovisual data on this drive explicitly contradicts every single statement made by the petitioners today regarding Mrs. Blackwell's behavior leading up to her hospitalization. It also provides clear, irrefutable visual evidence regarding the origin of the sedative found in her bloodstream." Beatrice shot up from her chair, her composure completely annihilated. Her chair tipped backward, crashing loudly against the wall. "This is a trick," Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the sterile walls, her aristocratic refinement entirely replaced by cornered desperation. "That report is a complete fabrication. That video is fake. She set us up. She manipulated the hospital." "The hospital administration and their chief of toxicology are prepared to testify under oath to the document's absolute authenticity," Harrison replied calmly, utterly unbothered by her hysterical outburst. "As are the paramedics who transported her and the laboratory technicians who processed her blood work. We request an immediate emergency recess." Sterling barked, his voice tight and panicked. He aggressively shoved his legal pads into his briefcase, refusing to look at Jason or Beatrice. He needed to get his clients out of that room before they confessed to any more felonies on the official record. The judge, who had been monitoring the deposition proceedings via a secure remote video feed, unmuted his microphone. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life, showing the judge sitting in his chambers. His expression was incredibly grave, his jaw set in a hard, disapproving line. He had read the newly submitted toxicology report and grasped the staggering contradiction it presented to the sworn testimonies he had just listened to. However, the legal system moves with a deliberate, frustratingly cautious momentum, adhering to strict procedural protocols regardless of the explosive nature of new evidence. Given the extreme severity of the allegations brought forth by the defense and the highly concerning nature of the newly presented medical and digital evidence, the judge stated, his voice booming heavily through the deposition room speakers, "I cannot in good conscience rule on the emergency temporary conservatorship today." Beatrice let out a sharp, desperate gasp of relief. She mistakenly believed a delay was a victory. She thought her money still had power. "I am therefore delaying the final ruling on the injunction until Monday morning at 9 o'clock, the judge continued. "Both parties are strictly instructed to submit all further evidentiary documentation, including the security footage referenced by Mr. Harrison, to my chambers by Friday afternoon for comprehensive review. This deposition is officially adjourned." The monitor went black. The delay was legally standard, but I could see the immediate visceral effect it had on my enemies. The damage was undeniable. The immaculate facade had cracked wide open. Beatrice and Jason had walked into the room as benevolent, concerned family members trying to save a troubled woman. They were walking out exposed as greedy, calculating predators and potential violent felons. Sterling did not say a word to them. He simply grabbed his briefcase and marched out of the room, leaving his junior associate to hastily gather the remaining files. Jason and Beatrice hurried after their lawyers, scrambling to contain the catastrophic fallout. Their arrogant, confident strides were completely gone, replaced by a frantic, panicked retreat. They looked like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I remained seated at the mahogany table, my hands still neatly folded in my lap. I watched the door close behind them, feeling a cold, profound sense of satisfaction settling deep into my bones. The battle was not entirely over, but the tide of the war had irrevocably turned. Beatrice and Jason thought the judge's delay gave them a lifeline. They thought they had the weekend to leverage their social connections to spin a new narrative to somehow bury the toxicology report and bribe their way out of the impending disaster. They thought they still held the upper hand because they believed they still controlled my company. They had absolutely no idea that they had merely stepped off a sinking ship and directly onto a live landmine. Monday was coming, and with it the absolute inescapable destruction of their entire world. But first they had to survive Friday. They had planned their massive, luxurious rebranding gala for Friday night, intending to use the event to publicly humiliate me and cement their theft in front of Chicago's elite. The judge's delay meant they would proceed with the party desperate to project strength and secure public opinion before the court could officially rule against them. I turned to Harrison, who was quietly packing his files away. I offered him a small, razor-sharp smile. "They are going to throw their party," I said softly. "They are going to stand on a stage and try to convince the world that they won." "Let them," Harrison replied, clicking his briefcase shut. "The higher they climb on that stage, the harder the impact will be when they fall. We have the footage prepped and ready for the audio-visual intercept." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my conservative dress. They believed they could erase me. They believed they could steal my life's work and lock me in a padded room simply because they felt entitled to my wealth. They were about to learn a very painful, very public lesson. You cannot erase a woman who holds all the cards, especially when she is the one dealing the deck. The judge's decision to delay the ruling until Monday gave Beatrice and Jason exactly what they craved most: a false sense of absolute invincibility. In their arrogant minds, a delay was as good as a victory. They believed their expensive lawyers would somehow bury the toxicology report over the weekend. They believed their old money status made them immune to the consequences of perjury. And most dangerously, they believed they still had 48 hours to completely rewrite the public narrative. They wanted to seal their victory in the court of public opinion before the actual court could weigh in on Monday morning. They wanted to make the absorption of my company so public, so celebrated, and so deeply intertwined with their social standing that untangling it would be impossible. So they threw a party. The Crystal Ballroom at the Grand Hotel downtown was a monument to excessive wealth. Beatrice had spared no expense, likely charging the entire event to a corporate credit card she fully expected my supposedly acquired company to pay off. Towers of imported white orchids dominated every table. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated with trays of caviar and vintage champagne. The room was absolutely packed with Chicago's corporate elite venture capitalists, high society matriarchs, and a swarm of local business press. Beatrice had invited everyone who mattered. She wanted a massive, undeniable audience for her crowning achievement. I arrived precisely an hour after the doors opened. I did not sneak through a back entrance or hide in the kitchens. I simply walked through the main double doors, cloaked in the sheer arrogance of the crowd. I wore a tailored floor-length emerald gown with sharp architectural shoulders. It was a dress designed for war. I slipped into the shadowed alcove near the massive projector screens, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, and watched the Blackwell family perform their twisted play. Courtney was the first one I spotted. She was holding court near a towering ice sculpture of the new company logo, laughing shrilly at a joke made by a junior banking executive. My stolen diamond tennis necklace sparkled violently against her collarbone. My rose gold Cartier watch weighed down her wrist. She was parading my hard-earned assets like hunting trophies, completely oblivious to the fact that she was currently wearing grand larceny on her body. She looked so incredibly proud of herself, sipping champagne while pretending to belong in a world she had done absolutely nothing to earn. Jason was standing near the press pit. He was holding a microphone for a local business news channel, projecting the exact brand of sorrowful reluctance he had practiced in the hospital. I listened as his voice carried over the ambient noise of the ballroom. He was telling the reporter that stepping into the chief executive role was a heavy burden, but one he accepted out of profound love for his ailing wife. He actually looked into the camera and stated that my mind had simply fractured under the relentless pressure of the tech industry. He claimed I was currently resting at a private, heavily supervised wellness retreat, completely isolated from my own safety. The reporter nodded sympathetically, eating up every single fraudulent syllable. At exactly 9 o'clock, the string quartet ceased playing. The massive crystal chandeliers dimmed, casting a warm theatrical spotlight onto the main stage. The ambient chatter of 300 wealthy guests faded into an expectant silence. Beatrice glided up the carpeted stairs to the podium. She wore a stunning sapphire gown, her hair swept up into an immaculate twist. She looked every inch the powerful, benevolent matriarch she desperately wanted the world to believe she was. She adjusted the microphone, letting the silence stretch out to command absolute attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and dear friends," Beatrice began, her voice amplified across the ballroom, dripping with a sickeningly sweet practiced sorrow. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We gather this evening not just to celebrate a corporate milestone, but to honor the resilience of family in the face of profound personal tragedy." She paused, placing a delicate hand over her heart, surveying the crowd with perfectly manufactured melancholy. "Many of you are aware of the dark cloud that has hovered over the Blackwell family this past week. My daughter-in-law, Melanie, is a woman of intense, fiery ambition. She came from very modest beginnings, a background entirely devoid of the structural support required to navigate the ruthless upper echelons of the global supply chain market. Despite her lack of pedigree, she tried her absolute best. We were all so incredibly proud of her charming little enterprise. The sheer venom coated in sugar made my jaw clench. She was publicly reducing a 9-figure corporate empire to a charming little enterprise. She was actively diminishing a decade of my blood, sweat, and tears into a cute hobby that had simply gotten out of hand. But ambition, when unchecked by proper breeding and emotional fortitude, can be a dangerous fire. Beatrice continued, her tone shifting to one of mournful pity. Melanie pushed herself too far. She flew too close to the sun. The relentless demands of her position caused a catastrophic fracture in her mind. We watched helplessly as she lost her grip on reality, descending into paranoia and severe psychiatric distress. It broke our hearts to see her brilliant light extinguished by the crushing weight of her own unnatural aspirations. A collective murmur of sympathy washed through the ballroom. I watched wealthy investors shake their heads sadly, completely buying into the narrative of the tragic, overworked new money girl who cracked under the pressure of a world she did not belong in. When a crisis of this magnitude strikes, a true family does not abandon their own, Beatrice declared, her voice rising with dramatic fortitude. We step in, we shield them, we take the heavy burdens from their fragile shoulders so they can find peace. That is exactly what my son Jason has done. Jason stepped onto the stage, joining his mother at the podium. He placed a supportive hand on her back, looking out at the crowd with a deeply serious, heroic expression. He looked exactly like the savior they were painting him to be. Jason has legally and permanently assumed the mantle of Chief Executive Officer, Beatrice announced proudly, her eyes gleaming with absolute greed. He has taken control of the operational helm to save Melanie's legacy from total ruin. He brings the steady hand, the elite education, and the generational business acumen that this company desperately requires to survive. We are cleaning up the mess, streamlining the chaos, and instituting proper corporate governance. Beatrice raised her glass high into the air. Tonight, we do not just announce a change in leadership, we announce an evolution. Effective immediately, Melanie's firm is being officially absorbed and completely integrated into the Blackwell family portfolio. We are restructuring the board, purging the unstable elements, and rebranding the entire global operation under the Blackwell name. We are bringing order to the chaos. We are bringing prestige to the platform. The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The investors cheered loudly. The press snapped photographs of the triumphant mother and son standing united on the stage. They were literally clapping for my targeted destruction. They were celebrating a hostile takeover built entirely on poisoned wine, forged signatures, and blatant perjury. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the alcove, letting the sickening sound of their applause wash over me. Beatrice leaned into the microphone one last time, delivering her final devastatingly condescending line. "So please raise your glasses with me," Beatrice commanded, a wicked, victorious smile stretching across her face. "To the future of the Blackwell family portfolio, and to our dear, sweet Melanie. May she find the quiet, supervised rest she so desperately needs, safely locked away from the stressful world of business." To the Blackwells, the crowd chanted in unison, clinking their crystal flutes together. I watched Jason and Beatrice toast each other on the stage, drinking in the adulation of their peers. They truly believed they had won. They believed they had successfully rewritten history, erased my existence, and stolen my empire right out from under me. They thought the story was over. They had absolutely no idea that I was standing less than 50 feet away from them, waiting in the darkness, completely prepared to turn their grand celebration into a public execution. I raised my own glass, a silent toast from the shadows. My timing, orchestrated through a secure connection with Harrison's tech team, was impeccable. Just as the crowd's chant began to fade, a sharp, piercing burst of feedback erupted from the sound system. Beatrice flinched, tapping the microphone. "Testing," she said, her voice replaced by a dull crackle. "Apologies, everyone. A minor technical difficulty." She signaled to the AV technician at the back of the room, a young man who looked genuinely bewildered. But this wasn't a glitch. This was a hostile takeover of a different kind. The massive high-definition projector screens flanking the stage, which moments before had displayed the sterile blue placeholder graphic for the new company logo, suddenly went entirely black. The ambient lighting in the ballroom plummeted, plunging the room into near darkness. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Jason stepped forward, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room for the source of the disruption. Then the screens flared back to life. It wasn't a logo. It wasn't a promotional video. It was a wide-angle shot of a dining room. My dining room. The quality was pristine, the colors vivid, the detail unmistakable. The ballroom fell dead silent. The transition from high society celebration to voyeuristic horror was instantaneous. On the screen, Jason and Courtney were standing at the mahogany sideboard. The audio piped directly through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system was shockingly clear. "Did you get them all?" Jason's voice echoed across the silent crowd. He wasn't projecting the image of a devoted husband. His tone was clinical, detached, entirely focused on a small white mortar and pestle in his hand. Courtney leaned against the sideboard, holding a small, clear plastic baggie containing several more pills. "I crushed 4 of the heavy ones. That's enough to knock out a horse, Jason. Are you sure it won't be too obvious?" A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The investors, the socialites, the press. Everyone stared at the massive screens, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the crime unfolding before them. "It won't matter," Jason replied, his voice cold and calculating. "We tell the paramedics she had a breakdown. We tell them she's been erratic. With her background, no one will question a stress-induced collapse." He scraped a fine white powder from the mortar into a crystal wine glass. He picked up a bottle of expensive red wine and poured, watching the dark liquid swallow the powder. Beatrice walked into the frame on the screen. She was wearing the exact same sapphire necklace she had worn to the deposition. She approached the sideboard, her face set in a hard, uncompromising glare. The benevolent matriarch was gone, replaced by a ruthless conspirator. "Are you sure she took it?" Beatrice asked, her voice sharp, demanding. "Relax, mother." Courtney laughed, a cruel, discordant sound that filled the ballroom. "She's going to drink it. She always drinks exactly what Jason pours her. By tomorrow morning, everything will be ours." Beatrice examined the wine glass, her eyes narrowing. "Make sure she drinks all of it before we bring out the papers. I don't want any hesitation when she signs the power of attorney. She needs to be completely incapacitated but capable of holding a pen." The video paused, freezing on Beatrice's face, her expression a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. The silence in the ballroom was profound. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of absolute shock, of a collective realization that they were witnessing a felony. Beatrice stood frozen on the stage, the dead microphone still clutched in her hand. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving her looking like a wax figure. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was trapped in the spotlight, her carefully constructed narrative annihilated in less than 60 seconds. Jason stumbled backward, his arrogant posture dissolving into a crouch of sheer terror. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting toward the exit, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He looked at the massive screens at his own face, his own hands preparing the poisoned drink. He looked at the crowd, seeing the horror and revulsion etched on the faces of the people he had just tried to impress. Courtney, who had been standing near the ice sculpture, let out a sharp, piercing shriek. She threw her hands over her face, inadvertently knocking her champagne flute to the ground. The glass shattered, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the silent room. The murmurs began, a low, rising tide of condemnation. The investors who had just applauded the takeover were now shaking their heads in disgust. The socialites who had pitied the fragile daughter-in-law were now glaring at the Blackwells with unfiltered contempt. The press, initially invited to document a triumph, were now furiously typing notes capturing the implosion of a Chicago dynasty. "This is a fabrication," Beatrice suddenly screamed, her voice cracking, her aristocratic composure completely destroyed. She pointed a trembling finger at the screens. "That is not real. Someone has altered that footage. It's a deepfake. It's a lie." Her denial was desperate, pathetic, and utterly unconvincing. The footage was too raw, too detailed, too perfectly aligned with the reality they had tried so hard to conceal. I stepped out from the shadows of the alcove. The emerald gown caught the light as I moved, projecting an aura of power and undeniable presence. The crowd parted for me instinctively, their eyes wide with disbelief and a newfound respect. I wasn't the broken, sedated victim they had been told about. I was the architect of their destruction, and I was walking straight toward the stage. I ascended the short flight of stairs, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. I didn't rush. I moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of an apex predator closing in on its prey. I approached Beatrice, who shrank back, her eyes wide with terror. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached out and took the dead microphone from her trembling hand. She surrendered it without a fight, completely defeated. I tapped the microphone twice. The sound system, magically restored by Harrison's team, hummed to life. The sharp taps echoed through the ballroom, commanding absolute silence. I turned to face the crowd, letting my gaze sweep over the sea of stunned faces. I looked at the investors, the press, the high society elites who had gathered to witness my execution. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm, resonant, and entirely in control. I apologize for the dramatic interruption, but I felt it was crucial to clarify a few discrepancies in the narrative you've just heard. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. "As you can clearly see, I am perfectly well. My fragile constitution was in fact a chemically induced state orchestrated by the very people standing on this stage." A wave of shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. I raised a hand, silencing them instantly. "But the poisoning is merely the prologue to the main event," I continued, my voice steady, relentless. "The real deception lies in the corporate transition you just applauded." I turned my gaze directly toward Jason. He was visibly trembling now. A fine sheen of cold, panicked sweat coated his forehead, catching the glare of the stage lights. He looked exactly like a man standing on a trapdoor waiting for the lever to be pulled. I did not keep him waiting. "The company you believe Jason assumed control of 3 days ago simply does not exist anymore," I stated, speaking clearly into the microphone so every single investor and reporter could hear the absolute truth. "I legally dissolved the primary operations of my supply chain analytics firm before he even walked into my corporate headquarters on Monday morning. The proprietary algorithms, the Tier 1 client data, and the massive operational capital were all legally and permanently transferred to an offshore holding trust that I completely control." A collective gasp echoed through the crystal ballroom. The venture capitalists who had just toasted Jason's business acumen were now staring at him with undisguised horror. Phones were already being pulled from tuxedo pockets as investors scrambled to distance themselves. I took a deliberate step closer to my husband. The business you seized using that forged power of attorney was a decoy. It was a secondary liabilities shell corporation that I specifically designed for this exact scenario. I filled that hollow shell with $5 million in highly toxic, completely unpayable corporate debt. It is a financial black hole. Jason shook his head violently, his perfectly styled hair falling out of place. No, that is not true. I saw the dashboard. I saw the revenue rolling in. I checked the treasury portal myself. You saw a training simulation, Jason, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devastatingly cold. You saw a sandbox environment filled entirely with fabricated data. It was a digital mirage designed to keep you occupied while my legal team finalized the trap. And you walked right into it with your eyes wide open. When you took that forged document to the bank, when you legally claimed executive ownership of that specific corporate entity to steal my wealth, you inadvertently claimed all of its liabilities. By signing that paper and asserting your authority as acting CEO of the shell company, you and your mother legally assumed every single cent of that $5 million debt. You are personally, inextricably liable for it. Beatrice let out a guttural, choked scream. She lunged forward as if she wanted to physically attack me, but her legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the polished stage, the sapphire fabric of her expensive designer gown pooling awkwardly around her knees. She grasped at the hem of my emerald dress, weeping wildly, her high society composure utterly annihilated. You ruined us, Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her sudden poverty. You planned this to destroy our family. You set us up to be slaughtered. You destroyed yourselves, Beatrice, I said, looking down at her without a single ounce of pity. You decided my life was worth less than my bank account. You drugged me in my own home. You conspired to lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life so you could wear my jewelry to your country club luncheons. I simply handed you the rope and you tied the noose yourselves. The murmurs in the ballroom had grown into a deafening roar of scandalized chatter. The elite society crowd was in full retreat. Business partners were frantically texting their lawyers. The press reporters were practically vibrating with excitement, documenting the greatest corporate and social downfall in modern Chicago history. The pristine Blackwell reputation, the one thing Beatrice valued above all else, was completely incinerated in a matter of minutes. Jason fell to his knees beside his mother. He stared at his empty hands as if he could not comprehend how his sheer arrogance had failed him so spectacularly. But the financial ruin was only the second act of my counterstrike. The grand finale was just arriving. Right on cue, the massive double oak doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a heavy, authoritative thud. The sound cut through the chaotic chatter of the crowd, demanding immediate and absolute silence. Harrison, my brilliant corporate attorney, strode into the room. He was not alone. Flanking him were 6 uniformed Chicago police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives. Harrison carried a thick, heavily bound leather folder. It was the complete fraud dossier we had meticulously compiled over the weekend, containing every piece of irrefutable evidence. The officers marched straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The sea of wealthy guests parted instantly, giving them a wide berth. Nobody wanted to be standing too close to the blast radius of this arrest. The lead detective, a tall man with a no-nonsense expression, climbed the steps to the stage. He did not look at the crowd. He looked directly at the 3 crumbling figures of the Blackwell family. Jason Blackwell, Beatrice Blackwell, and Courtney Blackwell. The detective announced, his voice booming with undeniable legal authority. Courtney, who had been cowering near the shattered remains of her champagne glass at the back of the stage, let out a piercing shriek as 2 officers approached her. She tried to back away, but there was nowhere left to run. You are all under arrest, the detective continued, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The charges against you include aggravated assault with a controlled substance forgery, of illegal document, criminal conspiracy, and felony corporate fraud. No, you cannot do this to us. We are the Blackwells, Jason screamed, struggling frantically as a burly officer grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back. Do you know who my family is? Do you know who you are dealing with? Let me go. The detective was completely unmoved by the display of entitlement. You have the right to remain silent, he recited coldly, securing the handcuffs around Jason's wrists with a sharp metallic click. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Beatrice was practically hyperventilating as a female officer hauled her up from the floor. The elegant matriarch was weeping hysterically, her perfect hair disheveled, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, humiliating streaks. She looked desperately out into the crowd, searching for a friendly face, pleading for someone to intervene on her behalf. But her high society friends just stared back with cold, unforgiving judgment. The people she had spent her entire life trying to impress were now treating her like a diseased animal. Courtney fought against the officers securing her wrists. Wait, please, I did not do anything wrong. It was all my mother's idea. She made me do it. Courtney sobbed instantly, turning on the woman who had orchestrated the entire heist. As an officer secured Courtney's handcuffs, another detective stepped forward. He reached out and unclasped the rose gold Cartier watch from Courtney's wrist. Then he unfastened the diamond tennis necklace from her throat. He placed the luxury items carefully into a clear plastic evidence bag. These items are documented stolen property belonging to Mrs. Melanie Blackwell, the detective stated flatly. They will be logged as physical evidence of grand larceny. Courtney wailed as the diamonds were taken away, crying much harder over the loss of the stolen jewelry than the loss of her personal freedom. I stood at the edge of the stage watching the spectacle unfold with absolute, unbothered serenity. The police officers marched Jason, Beatrice, and Courtney down the center aisle of the ballroom. They paraded them right through the middle of their elite social circle. The press cameras flashed relentlessly, illuminating their tear-stained faces and capturing every second of their humiliating perp walk. The Blackwells were leaving their own rebranding celebration in handcuffs, their lives completely and irrevocably destroyed. Harrison stepped onto the stage and walked over to me. He offered a slight, deeply respectful nod. The offshore transfers are fully settled, Melanie. The $5 million debt has been legally and permanently assigned to Jason's entity. Furthermore, the conservatorship petition has been thrown out by the judge, and Dr. Vance has already surrendered his medical license to avoid immediate jail time for perjury. It is finished. You won everything. I looked out at the massive ballroom. The police had cleared the doors, taking the toxic remnants of my marital family with them into the cold night. The remaining guests stood in stunned, breathless silence. They were looking at me not as the fragile, uncultured girl who had married into their privileged world, but as a terrifyingly competent titan who had just executed a flawless, ruthless victory. I turned to a nearby catering waiter who was standing frozen like a statue near the edge of the stage. He was holding a silver tray with a single untouched glass of champagne. I reached out and took the crystal flute. I held it up to the harsh stage light, inspecting the bubbling liquid. There was no white powder settling at the bottom. There was no betrayal hidden in the glass. It was just pure, unadulterated victory. I turned back to the crowd. I raised the glass high into the air, a final commanding gesture that demanded their absolute respect. To true independence, I said, my voice carrying clearly and confidently through the silent room. I took a long, satisfying sip of the crisp champagne. It tasted like absolute freedom. I handed the empty glass back to the stunned waiter, smoothed the elegant lines of my emerald gown, and walked gracefully down the steps of the stage. I walked straight down the center aisle, my head held high, my posture radiating absolute power and unshakable confidence. The crowd parted for me once again, offering me a path paved with newfound reverence and fear. I walked out the heavy double doors of the ballroom and into the crisp, clean Chicago night. I was leaving behind a dead marriage and a family of greedy predators. I was walking forward as a wealthy, fiercely independent, and completely untouchable woman. The empire was entirely mine, and I had never felt more alive. If there is one profound lesson I have learned from watching my marriage and my in-laws' pristine reputation burn to the ground, it is this: never ignore your intuition and never apologize for protecting what you have built. As women, especially self-made women, we are often conditioned to be accommodating. We are taught to shrink our ambitions to make others feel comfortable and to trust blindly in the name of family. Jason and Beatrice relied entirely on that societal expectation. They genuinely believed that my lack of generational wealth made me naive and easy target for their old money entitlement. But loyalty is not guaranteed by a marriage certificate, and trust should never mean leaving your life's work unguarded. True empowerment means hoping for the best, but meticulously preparing for the worst. Securing your assets, keeping emergency documentation, and retaining a brilliant attorney are not signs of paranoia. They are the armor you must wear in a world that constantly underestimates female competence. When toxic, greedy people finally show you who they really are, do not argue with them. Do not try to convince them of your worth or beg for their respect. Instead, step back. Let them speak, let them scheme, and let them dig their own graves while you quietly hold the shovel. True power isn't about being the loudest in the room. It is about being the most prepared. Have you ever had to outsmart someone who severely underestimated your intelligence and worth? How did you protect your peace and your assets when the people closest to you showed their true colors? Share your triumphant stories in the comments below. If my journey to absolute independence resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of women reclaiming their power. Remember, your empire is yours alone. Never hand over the keys.